The American Old West was a land where justice was often decided at the end of a smoking gun. In dusty saloons, along lawless frontier trails, and in boomtown streets, men with quick tempers and even quicker draws built reputations that echoed far beyond their time. Some fought for law and order, others thrived in chaos and bloodshed, but all of them earned their place in the deadly legend of the Wild West. From notorious outlaws who left a trail of bodies in their wake to fearless lawmen who faced death daily, these are the top 30 deadliest gunslingers who shaped the violent heartbeat of America's frontier days. Who's your favorite gunslinger on this list? Or who do you think was the most dangerous of all? Drop their name in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of the Old West. Number 30. Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid remains one of the most infamous figures in the history of the American frontier. His story has been told and retold countless times, often blending fact with legend. Born Henry McCarty in 1859, he lost both parents at a young age and was orphaned by the time he was 15. His early life was marked by poverty and hardship. In 1875, he was detained for taking food to survive, and days later, for stealing from a local laundry. On both occasions, he managed to escape and eventually fled to the Arizona Territory. By 1877, he had adopted the name William H. Bonney, the alias that would become infamous. After a fatal altercation with a blacksmith, he became a wanted man and returned to New Mexico, where he joined a group involved in cattle theft. Billy's reputation grew dramatically during the Lincoln County War of 1878, a violent conflict between rival economic factions. He was accused of involvement in several killings, including that of Sheriff William J. Brady. National newspapers picked up the story, and the name Billy the Kid quickly became known across the country. In December 1880, Sheriff Pat Garrett captured him. Billy was tried, found guilty of Brady's death, and sentenced to be executed. However, he managed to escape custody once more in April 1881, during which two deputies lost their lives. 2 months later, Garrett tracked him down and ended his brief but notorious life. Although his time on the frontier was short, Billy the Kid's legend endures as one of the most enduring symbols of the lawless Old West. Number 29. Jesse James. Jesse James was one of the most well-known figures of the American frontier, an outlaw, bank and train raider, and the central figure of the James Younger Gang. He was born and raised in western Missouri, where his family held strong Confederate loyalties. During the Civil War, Jesse and his older brother Frank joined pro-Confederate guerrilla groups, often referred to as bushwhackers, who operated in Missouri and Kansas. These irregular fighters carried out raids and sabotage against Union forces and sympathizers. After the war ended, the brothers shifted from guerrilla activity to organized crime. Alongside their associates, they targeted banks, trains, and stagecoaches throughout the Midwest. Their actions made headlines and divided public opinion. Many Southerners admired them, viewing Jesse and his gang as rebellious folk heroes standing up against Reconstruction and Northern authority. A kind of frontier Robin Hood myth that persisted for decades. However, others regarded them very differently. To law enforcement and much of the public, the James Younger Gang were dangerous criminals whose actions brought fear and instability to communities across the region. Jesse's life came to an end on April 3, 1882, when Robert Ford, a relatively new member of his group, betrayed him in hopes of receiving a government reward and a promise of legal pardon. With his death, Jesse James passed into legend, becoming one of the most enduring and controversial figures of the Old West. Number 28. Butch Cassidy. Butch Cassidy, born Robert Leroy Parker in 1866, became one of the most legendary figures of the American frontier. Raised in a Mormon family in Beaver, Utah, he grew up on the rugged landscape of the West, where opportunities and temptations often went hand in hand. Cassidy began his unlawful pursuits as a cattle rustler, but his ambitions soon expanded. He turned his attention to larger targets, orchestrating train and bank raids that captured public attention and frustrated law enforcement across several states. Known for his charm, intelligence, and organizational skills, Cassidy emerged as the charismatic leader of the Wild Bunch, one of the most successful outlaw gangs of the late 19th century. Their operations included a series of headline-making heists, among them the 1894 robbery of the Union Pacific Overland Mail. By the turn of the century, pressure from law enforcement forced Cassidy and his close associate, the Sundance Kid, to leave the United States. In 1901, they traveled to South America, eventually settling in Bolivia, where they reportedly continued their criminal enterprises. Historical records suggest that Cassidy and Sundance met their end in Bolivia in 1908 during a confrontation with local authorities. Although many details of their final days remain uncertain, their story has since become one of the most romanticized and enduring legends of the Old West. Number 27. Sam Bass. Sam Bass was one of the most well-known figures active on the American frontier during the late 19th century. He was born in Mitchell, Indiana, in 1851 and left home while still young, heading west in search of opportunity. Eventually, he settled in Texas, where his life took a different path. Bass initially became involved in cattle rustling, but his ambitions quickly grew. In 1877, he joined a group of outlaws led by Joel Collins. Together, they targeted stagecoaches and trains in Texas and Nebraska, becoming notorious for their daring operations. Their most famous act took place in 1878 when they stopped a Union Pacific train at Big Springs, Nebraska. The group seized $60,000 in gold, a record-setting theft at the time, and the event propelled Sam Bass into national headlines. Newspapers and magazines chronicled his exploits, and his story even inspired a popular ballad, The Ballad of Sam Bass. The gang continued its series of robberies, but their growing reputation drew increasing attention from law enforcement. Ultimately, Bass's time on the frontier came to an end in Round Rock, Texas, on July 21, 1878, when he was intercepted by the Texas Rangers. Number 26. Bill Doolin. Bill Doolin was the founder of the original Wild Bunch, a name that Butch Cassidy's group would later adopt. His gang, also known as the Doolin-Dalton Gang, became infamous in the 1890s for a string of robberies targeting banks, trains, and stagecoaches across Arkansas, Kansas, Indiana, and Oklahoma. Born in Johnson County, Arkansas, in 1858, Doolin spent his early years working as a cowboy and farmer. Like many others on the frontier, he eventually turned to crime, seeking wealth and notoriety in a region where law enforcement was often limited. In 1891, Doolin joined the Dalton Gang, participating in several of their activities, including the ill-fated bank raid in Coffeyville, Kansas, in 1891,892. After that event, he parted ways with the Daltons and organized his own group, the Wild Bunch, which soon became one of the most active outlaw gangs of the period. Throughout the early to mid-1890s, Doolin and his men continued their campaigns of theft across the Midwest, gaining widespread attention from both the press and law enforcement. By 1896, authorities had successfully pursued the gang, bringing their activities to an end in Lawson, Oklahoma. Bill Doolin's legacy extended beyond his criminal career. He had a son who later chose to distance himself from his father's reputation, taking the name of his stepfather and living a lawful, quiet life, a stark contrast to the turbulent world that had defined Bill Doolin's own. Number 25. Belle Starr. Belle Starr, born Myra Maybelle Shirley, was one of the most famous female figures associated with outlaw life in the American West. She gained nationwide attention, particularly after her mysterious death, and became a lasting symbol of the frontier's darker legends. Starr was born in Carthage, Missouri, into a well-respected family. Her father served as a judge, and her mother was well-educated, ensuring that Belle received a solid education both at home and in private schools. Known for her horsemanship, sharp shooting skills, striking appearance, and bold personality, she was far from the typical woman of her era. In 1866, she married Jim Reed, a former Confederate guerrilla fighter. The couple had 2 children together, but their lives were marked by instability. After Reed's death in 1874, Belle found herself raising their children alone. During this period, she became increasingly connected to well-known outlaw circles, including members of the James Younger gang. In 1880, she married Sam Starr, a Cherokee man involved in illegal activities, and the two settled in Indian Territory. Together, they became implicated in horse theft and other crimes, leading to multiple arrests, though Bell was rarely convicted. In 1883, she was found guilty of horse theft, a conviction that further added to her notoriety. Her life ended unexpectedly in 1889 near Fort Smith, Arkansas. The circumstances surrounding her death remain one of the enduring mysteries of the Old West, as the person responsible was never identified. Number 24. Curly Bill Brocious. Curly Bill Brocious was one of the central figures of the Cochise County Cowboys, a loosely organized group of cattle rustlers and outlaws who operated in the Arizona Territory during the late 1870s and early 1880s. Born around 1845 in Crawfordsville, Indiana, Brocious headed west in the 1870s, eventually settling in Arizona. There he became deeply involved in outlaw activities and quickly earned a reputation as one of the most prominent figures in the region's criminal underworld. Brocious was known for his unpredictable temper and his skill with firearms, traits that often brought him into conflict with law enforcement. He became a central figure in several major confrontations, including the Battle of Skeleton Canyon in 1881, a clash that highlighted the growing tensions between lawmen and outlaw groups in the territory. He was also implicated in several high-profile crimes, among them the death of Tombstone's Sheriff Fred White. Brocious's actions made him both a notorious figure in the press and a primary target for local authorities. In 1882, his life came to an end during a confrontation with Wyatt Earp near Mescal Spring, Arizona. With his death, the power of the Cochise County Cowboys rapidly declined, signaling the closing chapter of one of the most turbulent and lawless eras in Arizona's frontier history. Number 23. Cole Younger. Cole Younger was a prominent member of the James Younger gang, one of the most infamous outlaw groups of the American frontier. He was born in Clay County, Missouri, to Robert and Zerelda James, and was the younger brother of Frank James. During the Civil War, Younger joined the Confederate forces and served as a bushwhacker, taking part in irregular warfare along the border states. After the conflict ended, he and his brothers shifted toward criminal activity, targeting banks, trains, and stagecoaches across the Midwest. The James Younger gang quickly gained nationwide notoriety for their string of high-profile robberies, including the attempted raid on a bank in Northfield, Minnesota in 1876, an event that would ultimately lead to the gang's downfall. Following the failed operation, Cole Younger was captured and sentenced to 25 years in prison. He served 12 years before being granted parole in 1888. Upon his release, he sought a different life, working as a farmer and later becoming involved in business ventures. He even participated in a touring Wild West show, sharing stories from his past. Later in life, Younger underwent a profound personal transformation. On August 21, 1912, he publicly declared his Christian faith and expressed remorse for his earlier actions. He was baptized at Lee's Summit Christian Church on August 16, 1913, marking a final chapter of redemption in a life once defined by notoriety. Number 22. Ike Clanton. Ike Clanton was a key figure in one of the most famous conflicts of the American frontier. As a member of the Clanton family, he was part of the long-standing feud with lawmen Wyatt, Virgil, and Morgan Earp, as well as their ally, Doc Holliday. Born in Callaway County, Missouri, Ike was the eldest of 9 children of Newman Haynes Clanton, a well-known cattle rancher and trader. He grew into a tall, thin man with a restless energy and a reputation for a fiery temperament. His confrontational nature often brought him into conflict with local authorities. In 1877, Clanton relocated to Tombstone, Arizona Territory, where he became involved in the cattle trade. Over time, he also became associated with the Cowboys, a loosely organized group of rustlers and outlaws active in the region. On October 26, 1881, Ike was present at the now legendary gunfight at the OK Corral. Although he was unarmed and did not participate in the exchange, he fled the scene while his younger brother, Billy Clanton, lost his life. Following the incident, Ike was charged with murder, but was ultimately acquitted due to lack of evidence. Despite this, he remained connected to outlaw activities in the Arizona Territory for several more years. Ike Clanton's life came to an end in 1887 during a confrontation, closing the chapter on one of the most controversial figures in Tombstone's turbulent history. His role in the events surrounding the OK Corral ensured his place in Old West lore, not as a gunfighter, but as a central figure in one of its most infamous rivalries. Number 21, Frank James. Frank James was a Confederate guerrilla fighter and one of the central figures behind the James Younger Gang, one of the most infamous outlaw groups of the American frontier. He was the elder brother of Jesse James and played a significant role in shaping the gang's operations. Born in Clay County, Missouri, to Robert and Zerelda James, Frank grew up during a turbulent period in American history. During the Civil War, he joined the Confederate cause and fought as a bushwhacker, engaging in irregular warfare in the border states. Following the war, Frank and his brother Jesse shifted toward a life of crime, targeting banks, trains, and stagecoaches across the Midwest. The James Younger Gang quickly gained nationwide notoriety for their bold operations, including the attempted bank raid in Northfield, Minnesota in 1876. In 1882, Jesse James was killed by Robert Ford, a relatively new member of their group. Frank was not present at the time and was never charged in connection with the incident. Shortly afterward, he surrendered to authorities and served time for his past crimes. Upon his release, Frank James chose a quieter path. He returned to Missouri, where he worked as a farmer and businessman, and even joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, sharing stories from the frontier era. In his later years, he became a respected member of his community. Frank James passed away in 1915 at the age of 72, closing the chapter on one of the most notorious family legacies in Old West history. Number 20, the Sundance Kid. Harry Alonzo Longabaugh, later known as the Sundance Kid, began his criminal career as a cattle rustler. In 1887, he was arrested for horse theft and sentenced to 18 months in jail. It was during this time behind bars that he adopted the nickname Sundance Kid, a name that would soon become infamous across the American frontier. After his release, Longabaugh turned to larger-scale crimes, becoming involved in bank and train robberies. In 1889, he met Robert Leroy Parker, better known as Butch Cassidy, and the two quickly formed a close partnership. Together, they became central figures in the Wild Bunch, a notorious gang that specialized in high-profile robberies throughout the Rocky Mountains and the Great Plains. The Wild Bunch earned a reputation as one of the most elusive and successful outlaw groups of the Old West. Over the course of their criminal careers, they were believed to have robbed more than 20 banks and trains, all while managing to evade capture by law enforcement. By 1901, mounting pressure from authorities forced the group to flee the United States. They relocated to South America, eventually settling in Bolivia, where they reportedly continued their criminal activities. The final chapter of the Sundance Kid story remains one of the enduring mysteries of Old West history. Historical accounts suggest that he and Butch Cassidy died in Bolivia in 1908 during a confrontation with local authorities. However, some historians believe he may have escaped under an assumed identity and lived out his life in obscurity. Number 19. Fred Waite. Fred Waite was a Chickasaw man who lived a remarkable and multifaceted life on the American frontier. Known first for his time as a cowboy in New Mexico and as a member of Billy the Kid's group, he later gained respect as a statesman, serving in the Chickasaw Nation's government and as its Attorney General. Waite was born in the Chickasaw Nation in Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. As a young man, he left his homeland to work as a cowboy in New Mexico Territory. While employed as a ranch hand for John Tunstall, he met William H. Bonney, better known as Billy the Kid, and several other men who would become central figures in one of the West's most famous conflicts. In 1878, Waite became involved in the Lincoln County War, a violent feud over business and political power in southeastern New Mexico. He was present during the death of Sheriff William J. Brady and one of his deputies, as well as during the confrontation at the McSween House, both pivotal moments in the conflict. Following the conclusion of the Lincoln County War, Waite distanced himself from his former associates and returned to the Chickasaw Nation. There he embarked on a political career, being elected to the Chickasaw legislature in 1880. His leadership continued to grow, and from 1887 to 1897, 1891, he served as Attorney General of the Chickasaw Nation. Fred Waite passed away from rheumatism in 1895 at the age of 42. His life remains a fascinating example of transformation, from cowboy and frontier fighter to respected public servant and legal authority within his nation. Number 18. Cullen Baker. Cullen Montgomery Baker was a Tennessee-born figure whose gang was notorious for targeting Union soldiers and civilians across northeast Texas, southwest Arkansas, and northwest Louisiana in the turbulent years following the Civil War. Though some accounts claimed his group was responsible for hundreds of deaths, historians believe the actual number was likely closer to 50 or 60. Baker was known for his fiery personality and frequent involvement in saloon disputes. During one such altercation, he was knocked unconscious by a man named Morgan Culp. Born on June 23, 1835, in Weakley County, Tennessee, to John and Mrs. Baker, he moved with his family to Clarksville, Arkansas during childhood. As he grew older, Baker spent much of his time in the saloons and gathering places of what are now Lafayette and Miller counties. His father was an honest farmer who raised cattle and worked the land, but Cullen's path was quite different. In 1861, he enlisted in the Confederate Army, serving in the Trans-Mississippi Department until his discharge in 1865, when the Civil War ended. Upon returning to Arkansas, Baker turned to a life of crime. He and his associates were involved in numerous robberies of stagecoaches, banks, and general stores, contributing to the region's instability during Reconstruction. Baker's life came to an end in January 1869 near Washington, Arkansas, when he was located by lawmen. His death marked the close of one of the more violent and chaotic chapters of the Reconstruction-era South, and his name remains linked to some of the most turbulent years of post-war frontier history. Number 17. Dan Bogan. Dan Bogan is often described as one of the most overlooked and underestimated gunmen of the American frontier. Known for his fiery personality and strong will, he is profiled among the 12 most dangerous figures of the era in Robert K. DeArmond's book, Deadly Dozen. Bogan was born in Alabama in 1860 and moved to Texas in the early 1880s, where he worked as both a cowboy and a gambler. His quick temper and reputation for handling firearms made him a well-known figure in local circles. In 1884, he became involved in a major cowboy strike aimed at securing better wages and working conditions. As a result of his participation, he was blacklisted from ranch work and forced to leave Texas. Seeking new opportunities, Bogan moved north to Wyoming. There he became entangled in a dispute with a cattleman named Charles Gunn. The conflict escalated, and in 1887, Bogan was convicted of Gunn's death and sentenced to execution. However, he managed to escape from custody and fled south across the border into Mexico. Dan Bogan's life ended there in 1889, bringing a close to the story of one of the West's most notorious yet lesser-known figures, a man whose legacy remains a blend of rebellion, frontier justice, and legend. Number 16. Black Jack Ketchum. Thomas Edward Ketchum, better known by the nickname Black Jack, was one of the many outlaws active on the American frontier in the late 19th century. He was born in San Saba County, Texas, in 1863 and left home at a young age, eventually making his way west to New Mexico territory. Ketchum's early ventures into crime began with cattle rustling. In 1892, he joined the Hole in the Wall gang, a loose network of outlaws associated with Butch Cassidy, known for targeting banks and trains across the Rocky Mountains and Great Plains. The group became one of the most successful and elusive outlaw organizations in frontier history, carrying out more than 20 robberies without being captured. By 1896, law enforcement pressure forced the gang to disband. Ketchum was eventually captured and convicted for the death of a railroad employee during one of their raids. He was sentenced to execution and brought to Clayton, New Mexico territory, where the sentence was carried out. However, the execution was poorly handled, With no prior experience in such proceedings, the townspeople miscalculated the rope's length. As a result, combined with Ketchum's significant weight gain during his imprisonment, the event ended in a gruesome accident that shocked those present. Number 15. Johnny Ringo. Johnny Ringo was a well-known figure of the American frontier, loosely associated with the Cochise County Cowboys in the boomtown of Tombstone, Arizona Territory. His name often appeared alongside some of the West's most notable personalities and conflicts of the late 19th century. Ringo was born in Greens Fork, Indiana, on May 3, 1850. His family later moved to Missouri and then to Gallatin, Tennessee, where he spent most of his childhood. Known as quiet and introverted, he was reportedly bullied by other boys during his youth. In 1869, he relocated to Mason County, Texas, where he became involved in the violent feud known as the Mason County War. He was arrested and charged in connection with a killing during the conflict but was eventually acquitted. In 1879, Ringo moved west to Arizona Territory. There he became affiliated with the Cochise County Cowboys, a loosely organized group often in conflict with lawmen and citizens aligned with the Earp family. From 1881 to 1882, he was known to associate with Sheriff Johnny Bann, Ike Clanton, and Frank Stilwell. Ringo's name was also linked to some of Tombstone's most infamous events. He had a well-documented confrontation with Doc Holliday and was suspected by Wyatt Earp of being connected to the attacks on Virgil and Morgan Earp, as well as possibly having a role in the events surrounding the gunfight at the OK Corral. Although he was never charged with a crime, he was widely regarded as a dangerous and unpredictable presence. On July 13, 1882, Johnny Ringo was found dead in Turkey Creek Canyon, Arizona. The circumstances surrounding his death remain unclear, and speculation continues to this day. He was laid to rest in nearby Dragoon, leaving behind a legacy of mystery and controversy that continues to fascinate historians of the Old West. Number 14. Black Bart. Black Bart, born Charles E. Bowles, was one of the most unusual and memorable outlaws of the American frontier. Operating primarily in California and Oregon during the 1870s and 1880s, he became known not for brutality or intimidation, but for his unusual combination of refinement, politeness, and literary flair. Bowles was born in Norfolk, England in 1829 and immigrated to the United States with his family in 1849 during the California Gold Rush. He eventually settled in California, where he worked as a miner, farmer, and school teacher. In 1854, he married Mary Elizabeth Johnson, and together they had 4 children. By 1875, Bowles had turned to stagecoach robbery, focusing mainly on Wells Fargo routes. Dressed in a distinctive black suit and hat, a look that earned him the nickname Black Bart, he became known for his calm, courteous manner during holdups, often tipping his hat to those he encountered. Adding to his legend, he sometimes left behind humorous, self-deprecating poems at the scenes of his robberies, cementing his reputation as the gentleman bandit. Over the course of his career, Black Bart successfully robbed 28 stagecoaches. His downfall came in 1883 after he was injured during a failed attempt and forced to flee, leaving behind a handkerchief marked with a laundry tag. Investigators traced it back to him, leading to his arrest and a 6-year prison sentence. Released in 1888, Bowles disappeared from public view. His ultimate fate remains one of the enduring mysteries of Old West history. Some accounts claim he died in New York, while others suggest he may have relocated to Mexico or Canada to live out his remaining years in anonymity. Number 13. Rufus Buck. Rufus Buck was the leader of a small outlaw group that gained infamy for a 2-week crime spree in Indian Territory, now Oklahoma, in 1895. The gang's actions, which included robbery and attacks on settlers, eventually led to their capture and execution. Buck was born in 1874 to a black mother and a Creek father. He grew up in the Creek Nation and attended Welaka Mission, a boarding school for Creek children. However, his education was cut short when he was expelled for disruptive behavior. In 1895, Buck assembled a group of 4 young men, Lewis Davis, Sam Sampson, Mayoma July, and Lucky Davis. While staying in Okmulgee, the group began collecting weapons and planning their activities. Their campaign of crime began in earnest on July 30th, 1895, when they targeted law enforcement and later raided stores and ranches around the Fort Smith area over the following 2 weeks. One widely reported incident involved a salesman named Callahan, who after being robbed was offered a chance to escape if he could outrun the gang. Although Callahan successfully fled, the group took out their frustration on his assistant, resulting in further tragedy. The spree ended on August 4th, 1895, when U.S. Marshals apprehended the gang. They were tried and convicted on multiple charges, including robbery and attacks on civilians, and were sentenced to death. Although the case was appealed, the higher court upheld the verdict. On July 1st, 1896, Rufus Buck and his 4 associates were executed in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Their case remains notable in frontier history as they were the only individuals ever put to death in Indian Territory for crimes of this nature, reflecting the severity of their offenses and the impact they had on the region. Number 12. Tom Horn. Thomas Horn Jr. was one of the most complex and controversial figures of the American frontier. Over the course of his life, he worked as a scout, cowboy, soldier, range detective, and Pinkerton agent, leaving a significant mark on the late 19th and early 20th century West. Horn gained a reputation as a skilled and relentless enforcer during an era of intense land and livestock conflicts. He was widely believed to have been involved in as many as 17 killings while working as a hired gunman across the frontier, often employed by cattle interests to protect their herds and settle disputes. In 1902, Horn was convicted of the killing of 14-year-old Willie Nickel near Iron Mountain, Wyoming. Willie was the son of sheep rancher Kels Nickel, who had been engaged in a bitter range dispute with a neighboring cattleman, Jim Miller. The incident became one of the most notorious examples of frontier justice and conflict between cattlemen and sheep ranchers. On November 20th, 1903, the day before his 43rd birthday, Horn was executed in Cheyenne, Wyoming, following his conviction. His case quickly became the subject of intense debate, a controversy that continues to this day. Number 11. Jim Killer Miller. James Brown. Miller, often known by several nicknames including Killin' Jim, Killer Miller, and Deacon Jim, was one of the most notorious hired gunmen of the American frontier. He was believed to have been involved in as many as 12 fatal encounters during his lifetime, which earned him a formidable reputation in the Old West. Miller's nickname, Deacon Jim, came from his outwardly respectable lifestyle. He was a regular attendee at the Methodist Church and was known for abstaining from alcohol and tobacco, traits that sharply contrasted with his reputation as a professional enforcer. By the late 1880s, Miller was frequently employed as a hired gun by cattle ranchers and businessmen involved in land disputes and frontier conflicts. He became linked to several high-profile targeted killings, including the death of former Deputy U.S. Marshal Bud Ledbetter in 1909. That same year, Miller's criminal career came to an end when he and 3 accomplices were seized by an angry mob in Ada, Oklahoma. The group had taken justice into their own hands, accusing him of orchestrating the assassination of a former lawman. Miller's death marked the end of one of the most infamous careers in Western outlaw history, a life that embodied both the contradictions and the lawlessness of the frontier era. Number 10. Charlie Boder. Charlie Boder was a close associate of Billy the Kid and one of the most trusted members of his group. Known for his loyalty and courage, Boder played a significant role in several key events of the Lincoln County War and the turbulent frontier conflicts of the late 19th century. Born in Wilkes County, Georgia, Boder moved with his family to Mississippi when he was just 3 years old. By 1854, he was already working on his father's farm, where he developed strong agricultural skills. Seeking new opportunities, he relocated to Lincoln County, New Mexico in 1874. There, Boder befriended Doc Scurlock, and the 2 men opened a small cheese-making operation on the Gila River. During this period, Boder occasionally joined Scurlock in local posses that pursued cattle thieves and rustlers. His involvement with frontier justice reflected the often harsh and lawless nature of the region at the time. In 1878, Boder became deeply involved in the Lincoln County War, siding with the Tunstall-McSween faction in their conflict against rival forces. He was present at the Battle of Blazers Mills, during which he sustained injuries. Despite the dangers, he continued to stand by his allies, including Billy the Kid. By 1880, Boder was traveling with Billy and several companions when they were surrounded by Sheriff Pat Garrett's posse. During the confrontation, Boder was fatally wounded. His body was taken to Fort Sumner, where he was laid to rest. Charlie Boder is remembered not only as a loyal ally of Billy the Kid, but also as one of the most dedicated members of his circle. A man who remained committed to his friends, even in the most dangerous moments of their outlaw lives. Number 9. Doc Holliday. Doc Holliday was one of the most colorful and complex figures of the American frontier. A gambler, gunman, and trained dentist whose name became forever linked with the legend of Wyatt Earp and the tumultuous events of Tombstone, Arizona. Born and raised in Valdosta, Georgia, Holliday pursued a professional education, attending the Pennsylvania College of Dental Surgery in Philadelphia. He graduated in 1872 and began practicing dentistry, though he never worked full-time in the profession. In 1873, Holliday was diagnosed with tuberculosis, a disease that would shape the rest of his life. Seeking relief in a drier climate, he moved west, eventually settling in Dodge City, Kansas. There, he transitioned into a new life as a gambler and frontier figure, earning a reputation for his quick temper, sharp mind, and willingness to stand his ground. In 1881, Holliday followed his close friend Wyatt Earp to Tombstone, Arizona, where the Earps were locked in a bitter conflict with the Clanton and McClory factions. Holliday stood beside them during the infamous gunfight at the OK Corral and the turbulent aftermath that followed. After leaving Tombstone, Holliday spent his final years in Colorado, where his health steadily declined. He passed away from tuberculosis on November 8, 1887, in Glenwood Springs. Number 8. John King Fisher. John King Fisher was a notable figure of the Texas frontier, a rancher, lawman, and sometime outlaw whose life reflected the complexities of the American West. Born in Collin County, north of Dallas, Texas, in October 1853, Fisher began his early career as a cowboy. Like many young men of the time, he eventually became involved in cattle rustling, leading to several arrests. However, none of these charges resulted in a conviction. In 1874, he made a dramatic shift in his life when he was appointed deputy sheriff of Uvalde County. Known for his effectiveness and determination, Fisher gained a reputation for bringing order to a region often defined by lawlessness. In 1881, he was wounded during a confrontation with a group of outlaws in San Antonio. After recovering, Fisher committed himself fully to law enforcement. He served as sheriff of Uvalde County from 1882 to 1883, where he was respected for his firm approach to crime and his dedication to public safety. Fisher's life came to an end in 1884 during an encounter in San Antonio with another well-known frontier figure, Ben Thompson. His death was considered a significant loss for Texas law enforcement. Unlike many outlaws of his era, Fisher's story was one of transformation. Though he began on the wrong side of the law, he ultimately became a respected public figure and a symbol of justice in his community, a testament to the possibility of redemption, even in the rough and tumble world of the Old West. Number 7. Laura Bullion. Laura Bullion was one of the few prominent female outlaws of the American frontier. Born in 1876 in Knickerbocker, near Mertzen in Irion County, Texas, she became associated with the infamous Wild Bunch Gang, where she was known by the nicknames Della Rose and Rose of the Wild Bunch. Bullion quickly became an active member of the group, taking on important logistical roles such as selling stolen property, forging signatures, and securing supplies for their operations. In 1901, she was arrested in St. Louis, Missouri, for her involvement in the Great Northern Train robbery. Convicted of robbery, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison, of which she served 3.5 before being released in 1905. Following her release, Bullion sought a quieter life. She relocated to Memphis, Tennessee, where she worked in a variety of trades, including as a householder, seamstress, drapery maker, dressmaker, and interior designer. She lived there for the rest of her life until her death from heart disease on December 2nd, 1961. She is buried in Memphis under a tombstone that reads, Frida Bullion Lincoln, Laura Bullion, the Thorny Rose. Laura Bullion remains a fascinating and complex figure in Old West history. Though she was deeply involved in outlaw activities, she also displayed resilience and adaptability, ultimately leaving behind a life of crime to build a new identity. Number 6. Felipe Espinosa. Felipe Nerio. Espinosa was one of the most infamous figures in the early history of the Colorado Territory. A Mexican-American outlaw active during the spring and fall of 1863, he and his relatives were linked to a series of killings that deeply unsettled frontier communities. Contemporary accounts estimated that as many as 32 people lost their lives during their campaign. Espinosa was born around 1827 in Rio Arriba County, New Mexico. Skilled with firearms and horses, he was also known for his intense and volatile personality. In 1863, Felipe, his brother Jose Vivian Espinosa, and several cousins launched a campaign of attacks across Colorado Territory, driven partly by resentment over land disputes and anti-Mexican sentiment in the region. Their first known victim was discovered in May 1863, and by the end of that summer, at least 25 others had been targeted. Espinosa even sent a letter to Territorial Governor John Evans threatening further violence if he and his group were not granted pardons, land in Conejos County, and military appointments, a demand that highlighted the political and social tensions of the period. Eventually, U.S. soldiers and Colorado militia were dispatched to track down the Espinosas, bringing their campaign to an end later that year. Felipe Espinosa's death marked the conclusion of one of the most disturbing outlaw episodes of the era, and his remains were displayed in Fort Garland as a warning to other would-be criminals. Number 5. Bill Longley. William Preston Longley, better known as Wild Bill Longley, was one of the most feared and unpredictable figures of the American frontier. Renowned for his fiery temper, lightning-fast draw, and volatile personality, he is often remembered as one of the most dangerous gunmen of the Old West. Longley was born in Evergreen, Texas, and raised in a farming family. From an early age, he developed strong skills as a marksman and horseman, traits that would later define his reputation. His temper and willingness to resort to confrontation often brought him into conflict with others. In 1870, Longley became involved in a deadly altercation with a man named Wilson Anderson. He was arrested and charged but ultimately acquitted of the crime. Over the following years, Longley continued to be implicated in multiple shootings and was widely believed to have been responsible for as many as 32 deaths, a claim that cemented his notoriety across the West. Beyond his reputation as a gunfighter, Longley was also known for his involvement in cattle rustling and robbery. His lawless activities made him a frequent target for law enforcement. In 1877, he was apprehended for the killing of a man named George Thomas. This time, he was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. On October 11, 1878, at the age of 27, William Preston Wild Bill Longley was executed by hanging in Giddings, Texas. Number 4. Pearl Hart. Pearl Hart was a Canadian-born outlaw whose name became legendary in the closing chapter of the American frontier era. She is best remembered for committing one of the last documented stagecoach robberies in the United States, an act that drew widespread attention largely because it was carried out by a woman. Born Pearl Taylor in Lindsay, Ontario, Hart grew up in a well-to-do and religious family. Her parents ensured she received an excellent education, and at the age of 16, she was sent to a boarding school. It was there she met a young man named Hart, often described as a gambler and a troublemaker, with whom she quickly fell in love. The two eloped and eventually moved west to the United States, where their lives took a darker turn. In 1899, the couple carried out a stagecoach robbery near Globe, Arizona, seizing about $400. The event made headlines across the nation and turned Pearl into a sensation of the era, not just for the crime itself, but for defying traditional gender expectations. Their notoriety was short-lived. The pair was arrested in 1900, and Pearl was sentenced to 5 years in prison. She served 3 before being released in 1903. After regaining her freedom, Hart returned to Canada and chose a much quieter life, far removed from her brief but infamous career as an outlaw. She lived out her remaining years peacefully and passed away in 1955 at the age of 84. Number 3. Cherokee Bill. Cherokee Bill, born Crawford Goldsby, was one of the most notorious outlaws to emerge from the Indian Territory, now Oklahoma, during the late 19th century. He became widely known for his confidence, flamboyant style, and formidable skill with firearms. Goldsby was born on February 8, 1876, at Fort Concho, Texas. His father was of mixed African and European ancestry from Alabama, while his mother was a Cherokee freedman with African, indigenous, and European roots. After his parents separated, he was raised by his mother in Fort Gibson, Indian Territory. Goldsby attended school in Cherokee, Kansas, for 3 years before returning home as a teenager. In 1889, he became associated with the Cook Gang, a group of outlaws responsible for a series of robberies and other crimes across the region. His involvement quickly earned him a reputation as one of the most dangerous men in the territory. In 1893, Goldsby was arrested and charged with the killing of a man named William Murphy. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. On March 17, 1896, Cherokee Bill was executed in Fort Smith, Arkansas, at just 19 years old. His short but dramatic life left a lasting imprint on the turbulent history of the Indian Territory, and his name remains one of the most infamous in the annals of frontier crime. Number 2. Apache Kid. Haskell Bay Naintail, better known as the Apache Kid, was a renowned White Mountain Apache scout who later became a fugitive active across the borderlands of Arizona and New Mexico during the late 19th and possibly early 20th centuries. He was widely respected for his tracking abilities, deep knowledge of the terrain, and remarkable survival skills in the harsh desert environment. The Apache Kid was born in Aravaipa Canyon, about 25 miles south of the San Carlos Agency, as a member of one of the local groups of the Aravaipa Apache Band, a subgroup of the Western Apache people. As part of what U.S. officials referred to as the SI Band, he honed his abilities as a scout and earned recognition for his service to the U.S. Army in campaigns against hostile forces. In 1881, his life took a dramatic turn following the Camp Grant massacre, an incident in which U.S. soldiers and civilians attacked an Apache settlement, resulting in the significant loss of life. The event deeply angered the Apache people and contributed to Kid's eventual break from U.S. authorities. Over the following years, the Apache Kid was accused of numerous crimes, including theft and raids on ranches and supply routes across Arizona, New Mexico, and northern Mexico. He was also believed to have led a small group of Apache followers during this time. Despite extensive manhunts, the Apache Kid was never captured. His ultimate fate remains one of the enduring mysteries of the Old West. Some historical accounts suggest that he may have died in Mexico in the early 1900s, while others believe he quietly lived out his life somewhere in the American Southwest, disappearing into legend. Number 1. John Wesley Hardin. John Wesley Hardin was one of the most infamous figures of the American Old West, known for his volatile nature and long record of criminal activity. He was born in Bonham, Texas in 1853 to a Methodist preacher who named him after John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. Hardin's path into lawlessness began early in life. At just 15, he was involved in a fatal confrontation that marked the beginning of a violent career. Over the years, he was linked to numerous killings, though historians note that many of the claims he made about his exploits were likely exaggerated or fabricated. Eventually, Hardin was convicted of murder and sentenced to 24 years in prison. During his incarceration, he studied law and even wrote an autobiography, though his tendency to dramatize events often makes it difficult to separate fact from fiction in his account. Hardin was released from prison in 1894 and briefly attempted to rebuild his life, working as a lawyer in trying to re-establish himself in society. However, his violent past continued to follow him, and his life came to an abrupt end in El Paso, Texas, the following year. Hardin's legacy is one of controversy, a man whose actions embodied the brutality and lawlessness of the frontier era. His influence extended even to his own family, drawing his brothers into the same lifestyle of conflict and criminality that defined his own life. The gunslingers of the American Old West lived fast, died young, and left behind a legacy written in both fear and fascination. Some were outlaws who thrived on chaos. Others were lawmen who stood their ground against overwhelming odds. But each of them shaped the story of a wild and unforgiving frontier. Who do you think was the most dangerous gunfighter of them all? And who deserves more recognition? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another deep dive into the untold stories of the Wild West.